Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone, here and online. In this session, we talk about policies, regulations, and willingness to buy fertilizers, and also attitude towards GMO. I'm Gabi Waldhof. I'm a researcher at Halle and Hamburg University, and I would invite the first presentation by Fabiana Natali.
Here I am.
Yeah, maybe you could introduce.
Great, no problem. Thank you again. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for deciding to join this session. My name is Fabiana Natali. I am a PhD student from Bologna University, and today I will present this work on fisheries management by me and my two co-authors, Dr. Shishu from University of Arizona and Dr. Braca from University of Tuscia. So this is the outline of the presentation I have prepared for you today. We're going to briefly look at the introduction and at the main research motivation behind the study, and then we are going to look at the methodological approach and until the model setup. This is where we are at the moment with this research, and this is what we will discuss together with further steps of this work. Now, in economic theory, we know that fisheries are common pool resources. Therefore, they are non-excludable. It means that we cannot exclude anybody, we cannot prevent anybody to access the resource, and they are rival in consumption. Therefore, once some fish has been harvested, it is no more available for other species. These characteristics means that fisheries, as other common pool resources, may tend towards the so-called tragedy of the commons when they are not adequately managed. It means that we cannot attribute to fisheries very precise property right, and if not adequately managed, the fishery will go towards the depletion over time. The problem is highlighted even more if we are dealing with transboundary resources. That is, we are dealing with a common fish stock that is exploited by different players. In this case, this is what we're going to look at. We are right there in the Adriatic Sea. It's fun that I notice we have a map right there in person of this area. And we are going to look at this basin where there are some fish that are exploited by Bologna and Croatia specifically. There are other countries bordering the Adriatic Sea, but they are not relevant for the fishery we have selected, therefore we will not include them in this analysis. As to the fish we have, the species we have decided to work with in this research, those are defined as more pelagic species, and we will work mainly with anchovies and sardines. There are all around the world more small pelagic species. I can mention herrings as an example, but they are not relevant in the Adriatic context. Therefore, we will not talk about them in this research work. And one may ask at this point, why did you decide to go with this species? Why small pelagics particularly? And this is exactly why. As you can see from this figure, in the last couple of decades, the total harvests of both species combined, made by Italy and Croatia, have increased over time constantly. And in the last 4 to 5 years, they have represented more than 60% of total harvests by weight, only in the northern and central Adriatic area. It means that this is one of the most relevant fisheries in the area, and it is definitely the most relevant fishery by weight, and that's why we are interested in knowing what is going on here. From a policy management perspective, small pelagics, anchovies, and sardines have been regulated by the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean Sea, and they started in 2015 to implement some effort limitation policies. Those are policies that are aimed at managing, regulating the amount of fishing days or the weight capacity or everything that is related to the inputs of the harvesting process, the factors of production. But very recently, last year actually, they have decided to switch towards a different management approach. They have switched towards a quota management approach. It means that they accept a total allowable catch limit for the species, and they will not allow the fleet to go beyond those. And this is the first year they are actually implementing this system. Even though there have been successful and failed previous policy management regulations, and even though the recommendation that came out from the Fishery Commission of the Mediterranean Sea changed over time, we did not have a strong amount of evidence, of peer-reviewed evidence on how the fishery is doing from an economic perspective. If we look at not only Scopus but other research databases, we do not find many evidence of that. And most importantly, not only they are few, but they are also quite outdated at the moment, considering that the policy management has shifted towards a completely different approach. And this is why we believe this work is relevant, because there's a need right now for additional evidences on how these policies will affect the fleet from an economic perspective. And we really want to bring the socio-economic perspective again into the policy debate for this fishery, given that it is more neglected than the biological one at the moment. We will rely particularly on a previous study that came out almost 10 years ago, and they decided to implement a model of profit optimization and game theory, and we will update the framework they provided to adapt it to the current context in which the fishery operates. Therefore, our aim will be to develop a profit maximization model for the Italian and Croatian fishery combined. And we want to estimate the maximum economic yield. The maximum economic yield is just a technical term that researchers use in fisheries economics, and it means that we are estimating the point at which the fleets are more efficient because they are maximizing profits. Yes, that's the most efficient point. In our model, we want to account for the two species, sardines and anchovies, as I mentioned before. And I was saying that in the previous slide, we want to account for the newest policy approach, for the quota management approach. So we will have specific constraint for to account for that. And what is going to be interesting is that we aim to define and implement different scenarios of profit maximization, a non-cooperative scenario and a cooperative scenario. But I will talk about that a little bit more in a couple slides. The data sources we intend to use are the ones that I have listed here. There is no one single database that has all the data we need, so we have to combine European databases, Italian databases for the Italian fleet specifically, and FAO databases for an idea on how the stocks are doing if they are healthy. The variables we are interested in are fishing effort, that is commonly it represents the factors of production of the fishery, and it's commonly approximated with the amount of fishing days. So when I say effort to this presentation, I am referring to fishing days. And then we need economic variables, the quantity harvested, and the biomass, that's the amount of fish in the sea. We acknowledge that there are some limitations in this data. As you can see, data from Italy are available from 2004, but data from Croatia are only available starting from 2012. And that's because Croatia entered the European Union in 2013, and so they started participating in the data collection program only around the time they entered the Union. And we do not have previous data. They didn't have a data collection program ongoing. So we are working with short time series data, and we are working with aggregated data because these databases do not provide data at the individual vessel level. Therefore, every policy implication that will come from this study, it will be at the country level, at the nation level. It is still, despite its limitation, the most recent and the best data available, and it is still more than previous researchers could use for their research. So we hope to go a step further in this field by using this data. I just wanted to give you an idea on how the data looks like. I have mentioned a couple of times the term biomass. Biomass is a variable that usually it is used to as a proxy to approximate the amount of fish that's available in the sea, and it comes from yearly stock assessments. Those are reports, evaluations, and measurements that biologists and experts carry on every year, and they give us an idea on how much fish there's available in tons. It is basically, if you want to find another definition for that, is the wet weight amount of the fish stock overall. And these are our two stocks represented here, starting from 2004. Anchovies, the orange line, and sardines, the blue one. And just to underline a couple of differences, anchovies are overall more abundant than sardines, but they have constantly decreased in the last decade. So they are going through a higher exploitation phase pressure. We need this kind of data because we want to calibrate the growth function of the model. The growth function will tell us how the stock grows over time. And by knowing that, we can account for this growth in our model so that we are not harvesting more quantity than it is actually allowed by the natural cycle of the species, so that we are over time keeping the biomass constant. We are not depleting it. Otherwise, we are going to maximize our profit just harvesting every fish we have. Then I wanted to give you an idea on how the harvesting process is going. I have reported in these figures harvests in tons for anchovies in the first figure and sardines in the second one. Again, data for Croatia are available only from 2012. As you can see, there has been an historical trend before 2013 with Italy harvesting more anchovies than sardines and more fish overall. But starting from 2013, that's when the export limitation policies entered into force. They have drastically reduced the amount of anchovies that they are fishing, and now anchovies and sardines harvested by Italy are quite comparable. We cannot do the same kind of comparison like before the policy entered into force and after for Croatia, because we do not have the data. But what we can see is that in Croatia, the opposite thing is happening. They are harvesting 5 times the sardines for 5 times the amounts that they are harvesting anchovies. So there is a clear different pattern in the two countries, and that's mainly dictated by preferences of the Italian consumers and the Croatian consumers. Because in Italy, anchovies are more preferred, they have a higher price, and in Croatia, the other thing happens. So they prefer to harvest sardines. We need this data because we want to calibrate, let's call it common harvesting function. So we want to use, in this equation that I have reported here, the biomass of the fish stock and the amount of fishing days has two inputs, 2 factors of production. So we can estimate the quantity that's harvested every year according to the amount of input that we put into the system. And then I can show you some further model assumptions that we have. I was mentioning the first one right a couple minutes ago. So we want the quantity that's harvested to equate the amount, the quantity that represents the growth of the stock in a given year. And by doing that, we keep the overall amount of the stock constant. And that's a sort of sustainability assumption we are forcing in this model, so that we are not maximizing profit by just depleting the stock. It's not something we are coming up with. It's something that already exists in fisheries economics, even with the most basic models. But we want to have that in our framework as well. So we are going with that assumption. And then, given that we are maximizing profits, we need to build a profit function. Profits are defined as revenues minus costs. And in order for us to get revenues, we will multiply the quantity harvested by the price of the species. And in order for us to estimate the aggregated amount of costs, we will estimate a unitary cost parameter per day, and by multiplying that by the total amount of fishing days in a given year, we can know the amount of total costs in the same year. And so we will set up profit maximization by minimizing fish quantity and solve it for the optimal amount of fishing effort, because that's the input that they can control. They cannot control the biomass. And we will solve for the optimal amount of fishing effort that the fleet should apply. Before going on, I just want to tell you that in our growth function for the biomass, we are not accounting for parameters that are not directly related to the intrinsic growth of the stock. So we are not accounting for climate variation or temperature or salinity, all those environmental characteristics that we know are important, but it's quite difficult to build a model that includes all of that, and not even biologists do that all the time when dealing with this kind of problems. Yes.
We could wrap up in about 5 minutes.
I have 2 slides.
So it would be good if everyone had about 20 minutes so that we have some time for questions.
Yeah, it's okay. I have this one and then the further steps. This, I wanted to give you the model framework, the model setup. This is where we're at right now and what we're gonna do in the future. So thank you. I was mentioning that we want to build 2 different scenarios, a non-cooperative scenario and a cooperative scenario, and we want to build those for Italy and Croatia because those are the 2 main exploiters for small pelagic fisheries. In the non-cooperative scenario, we have an objective function, and those are the profits of the fleet. But the thing is that we are maximizing them separately. So we will have 2 different problems: one problem for Italy and one problem for Croatia, because they are not cooperating, they are not collaborating to reach an optimal solution for both of them. So we will maximize them as 2 different problems. On the opposite way, and I have not seen this in previous research, we will look at the problem from a policy-making perspective. And so we intend to compare this solution with the cooperative solution. And in the cooperative solution, our objective function is again the profit maximization function, but this time it's the summation of profits for both Italy and Croatia together. So we are accounting for a profit maximization at the whole basin level instead of at the single country level. And it will be interesting to look at how these 2 solutions will change, because maybe we have some efficiency difference between the 2 countries, so we will be able to allow the country that's more efficient to harvest a little bit more, and profits will be maximized. Of course, we want to make this problem we want to adapt this problem to the context in which the Adriatic fisheries is operating. So we want to account for specific constraints. And those constraints here just means that the quantity that are harvested cannot go beyond the total allowable catch limit that is established by the policymaker. And in both cases, we will define those constraints for every species so that we know that we are within the allowed harvesting limit. And so this is where we are at right now. We have defined this framework. We are working towards an analytical solution that's actually quite complex because we have complicated first-order conditions of this problem, and we are trying to manage things around to get a general solution to the problem. But we at least hope now that we got the data to be able to calibrate those parameters that I have mentioned, and so that we can give at least a numerical solution to the problem very specific to the fishery. So that the fleet, the countries, and the policymakers know what the optimal amount of fishing effort is. And that was the end of my presentation. I thank you all very much for listening. And I think I can stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Tia Pasolino, and apart from being at the registration desk all the time during the conference, I'm also a first-year PhD student at the Department of Food and Agricultural Science here at the University of Bologna. And today I present this contribution developed with my colleague Matteo Zavalloni and Professor Davide Biaggi that you met during this conference, aimed at understanding the role of policies to encourage collaboration activities among farmers. So this is the outline of this presentation, so I will discuss briefly those points during my contribution. So we are all aware, of course, that the main challenge for the society is related to the management, sustainable management of natural resources while feeding the increasing world population and ensuring at the same time the economic growth. So in this context, of course, bioeconomy represents a promising strategy, but what's the role of agriculture in the bioeconomy? Because sometimes the literature has neglected the agricultural field in this context because it was traditionally considered as sector with low innovation rate and low capacity to innovate. But the literature suggests, of course, an important role of agriculture in bioeconomy because it's a provider of ecosystem service, provider of public goods, and apart from, of course, the importance of food. So indeed, primary sector has a great potential in contributing to the objective of the European bioeconomy, because as we all know, the farm activity does not only it's not only related to the farm management itself, but also has consequences on the land conservation and on the environment as a whole. But this involvement of farmers, of course, can be also beneficial for farmers themselves because this can allow various benefits, as for example, the fair distribution of value among the value chains. But they need to be actively and meaningful involved. So they need to go beyond the mere horizon of the inputs, the raw materials, as for example, the biomass. Of course, this approach found in reality a lot of limits. The first one is the complexity that the farmers, of course, experience when dealing with the bioeconomy issues, because usually those matter imply a specific understanding, a specific knowledge about what in reality bioeconomy is and how they can apply this matter to their own business. So, of course, this led to the low awareness of what is the bioeconomy in practice and therefore difficult knowledge transfer activities for them. In this context, the literature suggests that cooperation and collaboration activities are a means to overcome these hardships that farmers face. And this approach poses a number of opportunities, as for example, the higher joint production that leads to the application of economies of scale, so bettering their position than in the value chains because of, for example, higher bargaining power when contracting prices. Of course, the diversification in production that leads to the mitigation of risk, the diversification in portfolio, a better investment capacity to carry out costly innovation, for example, because of the depleted resource that they have acquired, and of course, better access to information, better access to new market, to new knowledge that, of course, also is related to the fact that they are more noticed and that they have more probability to get finance, for example, in their project. But in reality, those collaboration activities are really difficult to start, and therefore we need policies to promote those initiatives, especially for farmers, because it's difficult, as I already said. So the objective of our work, of course, is to analyze what has been the effect of past policies and future policies in the contribution of the development of the European bioeconomy, and we do this looking, of course, at the literature and then comparing it to the cases already operating in the European scenario about bio-based business. We want to further analyze what is the key role of collaboration networks, as I said before, as a means to overcome the hardship experienced by farmers, and how this collaboration activity can be widely promoted. At the end, we plan to provide recommendation for decision maker to future policy measure at European level. So this, the approach of this study takes place in this Horizon 2020 project in COVID. The project itself aims at the transfer of the knowledge of bioeconomy among farmers in order to engage them in bio-based initiatives and to in order to strengthen their collaboration. This is done with a series of activities. One of them, yes, it's the activities of the organization of showcase visits to bio-based business in Europe, across Europe. As you see in the map, there are different countries involved. So it's 11 countries. So the project has a wide geographical scope, let's say. And we start our analysis from these clusters established in the context of the project that are by definition multi-actors. So farmers are involved, producer association, cooperatives at different level, but also there are public institution, private body, I know consultant activity as well. So a multi-actor approach then. The methodology we use is based on these 4 steps. Yeah, as I said before, first we have looked at the literature, we have reviewed the policy document related to the bioeconomy, particularly looking at the involvement of farmers. Then we decide the questionnaires aim at collecting the feedback of primary producers participating to the activity of the project, in order to understand their feeling about and their feedback about the knowledge transfer activity, in particular in the implementation of the bioeconomy. So, yeah, target was the primary producers. Then we designed a semi-structured interview that were aimed at gathering expert views that were suggested by each project partners about the past and future policy needs, especially at local level, so to understand the situation of each member state participating to the study. And then all this outcome collected until now discussed in a workshop with policy experts, where an interactive discussion will take place in order to draw comparison among countries and then highlighting best practice and gaps between different countries in Europe, sorry, including Italy. But as of now, still the project is ongoing. So the results that I present here today, it's just really a preliminary view of the study that we are doing now. So the result that I present is based on the analysis done with a thematic analysis of 45 questionnaires collected to among, as I said, primary producers in Europe. So it's important to highlight that these primary producers were involved by and were suggested by each project partner based on the ability of this primary producer to communicate the activities and the knowledge acquired during the activities to a wider target of people. So as I said, the content of the questionnaires was mainly related to the limits and opportunities when related to the development of the bioeconomy and to the knowledge transfer activity. Yes, so here in this table you see the composition of our initial sample. So we have different countries involved at the European level and different bioeconomy subsectors. So last week in particular, we had an activity here, not far from here, starting discussing the from the winery sector. And we presented a circular business model, a successful one, which is, as I said, not far from here. So this is the people that we were involved and where the primary results are taken. So just in a few words and we have analyzed those questionnaires in qualitative using qualitative methods. What we have found? We have found that, of course, a strong degree of heterogeneity exists in the actors that we have involved, and the main reason lies in the fact that some region seems, in terms of bioeconomy development, more advanced than others. So, for example, when we asked Greece or Bulgaria, those countries seem to lag behind to effective implementation of bioeconomy. So they were highlighting the need to push from, for example, starting from the demand side to consumers. So, of course, we have found that there is a high degree of complexities that arise from the fact that there are different plans at national level that are implemented when related to bioeconomy and to the different sectors involved. Then it was really interesting that especially for some sectors, as for example, the hemp one, the most obstructive mechanism was found to be the legislation framework, so the legislation and the normative framework at national level, while for others, of course, the economic feasibility of implementing a bioeconomy implementation was the most the factor most hindering the development. When we asked the respondent about which instrument they were considered most effective, of course, they claimed for more financial support, but this is, as we know, this is also a trend when you ask farmers about. But also, we realized that they also claimed a need for new innovation organization. This means activities that encourage collaboration networks, even if with those projects that are, of course, top-down initiatives. So collaboration in general has been identified as a new precondition to carry out new and costly activities in relation to bioeconomy, but not only that, because the level of engagement of farmers and primary producers was found to be affected by different characteristics that, of course, act at the individual level, so it's attitude towards the risk, for example, but also on the different factors acting at market or societal level. So yes, just a few words to conclude this this contribution, this research. Generally, the bioeconomy is seen by European farmers as a new business and good business opportunity, but it's still a complicated issue when it comes to the practical approach. So to overcome this, a multi-actor approach was suggested through new policy measures, not only involving private sector, but also involving public authorities, as for example, a university, in order to encourage the knowledge dissemination activities, for example. So then it's also important to consider a policy framework framework and not only policy in isolation, because there can lead to conflict of interest, and the same applies to bioeconomy subsectors. Of course, this study faced some limitation apart the limitation and criticality that exists intrinsically in the project itself. So we hope and we will collect more data during the next year, and of course we will discuss this topic further. So this was all for my contribution, and thank you for the attention.
Yes. Yeah, we can continue with.
I'm sharing your presentation. So.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Geir Gustavsen from the Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research, and I'm going to talk about willingness to pay for lettuce produced with unconventional fertilizers in Norway. And unconventional fertilizers are human waste and fish sludge. So the use of mineral and fossil fuel-based fertilizers are unsustainable for many reasons. The production is very energy intensive. There is limited feedstock, for example, phosphate rock to produce phosphate. And the application results in accumulation of the harmful substances in the soil and water. In addition, the global fertilizer prices are all-time high because of the rising cost of energy and transport, the increasing food demand, and the tight global supplies. And because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that followed. Also, human waste is a potential very useful economic resource. Today, most of it are lost in wastewater. And if the wastewater is not treated properly, it might lead to pollution in the lakes, rivers, and the marine areas. Because of the high fertilizer prices, farmers may be forced to use less fertilizers and thereby reducing yields and the quality of the crops. They may switch to crops that require less fertilizer, or they might substitute conventional fertilizers with unconventional fertilizers with nutrients from recycled materials. For example, fish, human waste and fish sludge. Human excreta has traditionally been recycled as fertilizer. Human urine contains the majority of nutrients presented in domestic wastewater. Both of them are important sources of key nutrients for plant growth. About 520 kilograms of human excreta contains 7.5 kilograms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And this could produce 250 kilograms of grain, which is enough to feed one adult person for 1 year. And urine from one adult in a year can provide fertilizer for 136 kilograms of wheat, which is enough for 1 loaf of bread per day. And the fish backbones and heads make up more than half of fish waste and have a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. There has been some successful efforts to recover nutrients from human waste and fish sludge. Successful low-cost urine diverting toilets that separately collect urine has been developed in Scandinavia and in other European countries. This is the Laufen toilet from Austria that has an intelligent design, concealing the urine trap. This toilet is manufactured in large scale in South Africa. Urine diversion at the horse is made possible through the use of urine diversion toilets, which has two outlets and two collection systems, one for urine and one for excreta. It can either be water flushed or dry flushed and come in different models. And this is fertilizer pellets. In Ghana, in Africa, fertilizer pellets from dried human waste are being used. And this is aquaponics, where the plants use the nutrients from the fish sludge. While technologies to recycle human urine already exist, these technologies are rarely applied. As these technologies develop, a primary concern is how the public is going to respond to these novel applications of the scientific research. There are some socio-cultural barriers to accepting waste recycling. The food may be looked upon as unclean or dangerous if consumed by humans. And some people may have the feeling of disgust and thereby will not consume the foods. About food neophobia. Food neophobia is defined as a reluctance to eat novel foods or an avoidance of novel foods. Food neophobia are psychological attitudes that may be considered a bottleneck for developing more sustainable consumption patterns. Neophobia is not only specific to the food items themselves, but also to the technologies by which they are produced. Food neophobia could stem from attributes of the input factors as fish sludge, for example, or from the production process, the aquaponic setup, or attitudes to the finished product. Hence, the aim of this study is to estimate the people's willingness to pay for lettuce produced using unconventional fertilizers, given food neophobia. We performed an online survey where about 1,000 individuals in Oslo participated. 10 questions about food neophobia were included in the survey. Also, 2 questions about willingness to pay for lettuce with unconventional fertilizers were included. We first estimated a latent neophobia index using the graded response model and the 10 neophobia questions. The neophobia index was included in a random effect interval regression model together with other socioeconomic variables. We estimated the model and tested the willingness to pay of the 10% with lowest neophobia against the 10% with the highest neophobia. So in the survey, we asked the following questions. Imagine that we are going to choose between 2 types of lettuce, which are both approved by the health authorities. Both lettuces look similar, but are produced using different types of fertilizers. How much are you willing to pay for the ordinary lettuce compared to the alternative lettuce produced below? One, lettuce produced with fish sludge as fertilizer, and two, lettuce produced with human waste as fertilizer. And the respondent chose one of the 6 alternative responses. Nothing, less than 15% more, 15 to 30% more than 30% more, don't know, and I will not buy the alternative lettuce no matter the price. And this table shows the distribution of the responses. 48% are not willing to pay more for ordinary lettuce compared to lettuce produced by fish sludge as fertilizer. And 41% are not willing to pay more for ordinary lettuce compared to lettuce produced with human waste. The don't knows are rather high, 18 and 16% in the 2 questions, and 6% are unwilling to buy lettuce produced with fish sludge, and 20% are not willing to buy lettuce produced with human waste, whatever the price. The variables used in the model are the following: gender, the age of the individual, marital status, dummy indicating children in the household, education level, household income, if the individual was born in Norway with at least one Norwegian parent, and the neophobia index. In the basic model, latent variables for the big 5 personality traits were also included, but none of them were significant, so they were dropped in the final model. So here, the latent neophobia index is based on these questions. In each of the 10 questions, a 7-point Likert scale is used, where 1 is totally disagree and 7 is totally agree. And here you can see the mean and the standard deviation. So before estimating the model, the continuous variables were analyzed. So the sign and the magnitude of the estimated parameters can be compared. It can be seen that males are less willing to pay for ordinary lettuce compared with both alternatives than females. And the effect is 2% and 6% respectively. Income has no effect that is included in the model because of willingness to pay. In general, is dependent upon income. Norwegian-born individuals have 4% lower willingness to pay for ordinary lettuce compared to lettuce produced with fish sludge than individuals born abroad, but there is no significant effect for the other alternative. For individuals with children, the willingness to pay is 5% higher in both alternatives than for individuals without children. The effect of neophobia is 0.02 and significant in both alternatives. Since this is a standardized continuous variables, we have to do some calculations. This will be done in the next slide. Finally, the intercepts tell us that the mean willingness to pay for a female with average income who is born abroad or with 2 foreign-born parents without children and with average degree of neophobia is 12% and 17% respectively. To find the effect of neophobia, we bootstrapped the model 500 times and estimated the willingness to pay for individuals at the 90th quantile of the neophobia variable and the 10th quantile of the neophobia variable when all other variables were held constant at their mean values. And we used ordinary t-tests to test for their differences. It means that we tested for the 10% most neophobic individuals against the 10% least neophobic individuals. The table shows that the VTP for the neophobic individuals were 10.8% and 15.4% and 5.5% and 10.5% for the non-neophobic individuals, when all other variables were kept constant at their means. The differences was 5.4 and 5%, and both was significantly different from 0 in the two cases. So neophobia certainly had an effect on the willingness to pay for ordinary lettuce compared to the alternative lettuces. The mean willingness to pay in the two cases were 8.3% and 13.1%. So the conclusions is that individuals are on average willing to pay 8% and 13% more for conventional lettuce compared to lettuce produced with fish sludge and with human waste, respectively. Between 40 and 50% accept the lettuce produced with unconventional fertilizers and are not willing to pay more for conventional lettuce. Gender, children in household, and neophobia are strong indicators of willingness to pay for ordinary lettuce compared to lettuce produced with unconventional fertilizers. And finally, some possible policy implications. Knowledge might play a very important role in reducing the fear of consumers regarding new food innovations. Effective communications strategies focusing on the food safety and environmental friendliness of food produced using unconventional fertilizers are needed. For example, campaign with green consumers to motivate others in buying food produced with unconventional fertilizers. To incentivizing the consumers to increase their willingness to pay for foods made with unconventional fertilizers. For example, promotion, discounts, and subsidies. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Swap places, I guess. I'm really impressed how prepared everyone is, so everybody is really important to 20 minutes. I could use this moment for an introduction already. So I'm Gabi Waldhof. I work at Halle and at University of Hamburg, and I work on public acceptance of products of the bioeconomy, particularly GMO. I've worked a lot with in my thesis, and I work on public debates and polarization of public debates and how to mitigate polarization. And in the project that I want to present today, I work with a collaborator of mine from University of Toronto, Joel. He's a professor of moral psychology. And we wanted to know whether extremely moralized attitudes towards GMO can be mitigated. Yeah, so the problem that we see is a striking divergence between experts and lay people. So in Germany, I'm talking about Germany, it's a German sample, but so for example, Leopoldina and the German Research Foundation have been repeatedly saying and distributing information that GMO products are as safe as conventional, but the German public remains extremely skeptical. Then in 2016, Scott et al. Published a paper that identified many GMO opponents as moral absolutists. That means that they state that GMO ought to be prohibited regardless of its risks and benefits. And it was a quite large proportion. I think it was 17% of the sample that they had of opponents. So people explicitly reject any consequence-based reasoning. They say, yeah, I don't care, whatever, I just don't want this to be accepted, to be approved. And this absolutism seems common among opponents. So in the US sample, another one, it was 71% of opponents, in France 85%, and in Germany 73%. And that's not just a random statement. So people show many of the hallmarks of moral beliefs about this topic. So they're more emotional about this topic. They state that it's part of their moral identity. They care more about it. Yeah. So as we know, the public debate about GMO has been blocked for quite a while. So it seems like the two parties discussing are not really able to work towards a consensus or to advance this conversation. And if this moral absolutism is so spread among the public, then this provides an explanation for why information did not have an impact so far. It's one potential explanation, definitely. And if people really reject any consequences, any benefits of GMOs or any risks, then obviously this provides a huge problem for policy making and public debates in general. So we wanted to test whether people are willing to abandon this moral absolutist belief when they are asked to reconsider it. And we also test this among supporters for the first time. So we conducted an online survey in Germany in 2020 about 3,000 participants, representative of the population in age, gender, and level of education. First, we asked people's attitudes towards GMO, so pro and con, binary, but also continuous. And then we asked these items for moral absolutism. Then we asked about their moral conviction, so how strongly people believe that GMO are part of their moral identity. Then we randomly assigned people to one of 4 probes, and these generally ask participants to consider what, if anything, would change their beliefs about GMO crops. And then again, after this treatment, we asked them again about their attitude and about their moral absolutism. So we could see how effective these probes were, and we could also see whether any attitudes changed. And here are the results. Red are the moral absolutists, blue are the non-absolutists. Generally, as expected, the majority of Germans stated to be against GMOs, was 60%, 40% were supporting it. Of all opponents, 81% stated to be moral absolutists. And of all supporters, 31%, which is a minority of supporters, but it's still significant. And generally, GMO support opponents were had stronger attitudes, so they were more extreme in expression, and more absolutists were also more extreme across all measures. And so they had extremer attitudes and extremer moral conviction. So then these 4 probes, we only tested those among the absolutists, because we assumed that those people who were saying that I am in favor of GMO depending on the consequences. Yeah, they were not relevant for our study. So we randomly assigned people to one of those 4 probes. Open-ended reflection and risk-benefit reflection were both open text boxes where people could state their answers. So open-ended asked for any circumstances. Risk-benefit asks for specific risks and benefits. Counter-examples provided options to people. And consequentialism is more a control treatment because it just asks if they really think that consequences didn't matter. So it could be expected that this 4th probe would be the least efficient. For the first one, open-ended reflection, we asked people what, so for opponents, we asked them, could you think of any consequence that may make it seem for you that GMO could be necessary? And for supporters asked, can you think of any consequence under which GMO should be banned? So both groups, between 40 and 50%, said that they couldn't think of anything, or just use this opportunity to restate that they're really against GMO or really in favor and they don't care. But what people stated a lot among the opponents were issues of food security. So if GMO could prevent famine or poverty, then this could change their minds, and then supporters, if it had health risks, they wouldn't want it. Then risks and benefits perceptions. So the majority of people here stated that they don't care, or even reaffirmed their position. But then for opponents, if GMO could yield higher yield or prevent famine, and then for supporters, if it had health risks. Then the counter-examples probes. So opponents said that if GMO could save human lives, they would reconsider their view. And then supporters would say that if it reduced quality of life or if it kills people, they would want GMO. And then the hidden consequentialism, it's maybe not that interesting. So among the opponents, 40% stated that they cannot imagine any situations in which this is acceptable. So we counted them as real expertise. And those were 14% among supporters. So these are the results for attitude changes. The numbers that you can see are movements along the Likert scale. So as you can see, the counter-examples probe among opponents was the most efficient one, but it only moved a quarter of a point towards a less extreme attitude. And then for supporters, there were also 2 significant changes, but small ones. And then the absolutism change, supporters on the left side, opponents on the right side. As you can see, generally, not many of absolutists deviated from their stance that they don't care about consequences. About 30% among opponents, among supporters, and about 10% among opponents. But supporters were generally way more fragile in their opinion, so they changed much quicker, even in the control group. And then among the opponents, the most effective probe was the counter-examples, which is the one where we presented consequences to people, where they did not have to reflect, but in advance we gave them ideas of benefits of GMO. So what can we make of this? So moral absolute beliefs about GMOs are common and hard to change, but almost everyone could state at least one consequence under which they would deviate from the extreme position. And what we conclude from that is that this moral absolutist explanation is more an expression of strong moral belief rather than a literal endorsement of a policy. And I think this is pretty important because the debate is conducted as if people really mean their absolutism. And the policy result also is that GMO are banned, although people do not even seem to really mean that literally. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.